We've got two scriptures this morning. The first one is Isaiah chapter 58, 1 through 12. Shout out, do not hold back. Lift up your voice like a trumpet. Announce to my people their rebellion, to the house of Jacob their sins. And yet day after day they seek me and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that practiced righteousness and did not forsake the ordinance of their God. They ask of me righteous judgments. They want God on their side. Why do we fast, but you do not see? Why humble yourselves, but you do not notice? Look, you serve your own interests on your fast day and oppress all your workers. You fast only to quarrel and to fight and to strike with a wicked fist. Such fasting as you do today will not make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose, a day to humble oneself? Is it to bow down the head like a bulrush and to lie in sackcloth and ashes? Will you call this a fast, a day acceptable to the Lord? Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin? Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, here I am. If you remove the yoke from among you, the pointing of the finger, the speaking of evil, if you offer food to the hungry and satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light shall rise in the darkness, and your gloom will be like the noonday. The Lord will guide you continuously and satisfy your needs in parched places and make your bones strong. And you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters never fail. Your ancient ruins shall be rebuilt. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations. You shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of the streets to live in. Our next scripture is Matthew chapter 5, 13 to 20. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hid. People do not light a lamp and put it under a bushel basket. Rather, they put it on a lampstand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven.
For God, the people of God. Okay. Let us, will you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our strength and our redeemer. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. One of my favorite YouTubers, I get sucked down to YouTube, whirlwind, whatever, all the time. Anyway, but one of my favorite YouTubers is a woman who shares about growing her own food, serving the food, and making meals for her family. And I think this is a little ironic since I've barely been able to grow potatoes. But she inspires me. She doesn't grow all her own food. She's working towards that, but we try, right? But as she's regularly cooking this food for her family, the thing that comes to mind this morning about her. What I'm reminded about her is that how many times during a cooking session she's reaching for salt. She's not just putting salt in at the beginning or at the end, but she's putting salt in when she puts the meat in, and then she puts a little bit more in when she puts the vegetables in, and then she does a pinch there. Well, she does a lot more than that, but I'm always thinking, this is going to be a little too salty, but okay, I'm not eating your food. But the notion is that she is putting salt. You not hear me? I get it. Okay, we are just gonna start all over again. Can we just start all over again? I'll start with. Okay. Mark said I was already finished. I'm not. Okay, we're gonna start back again. Okay, if you heard me, that's great. Operator error this morning. It's been one of those weeks. So anyway, what I was talking about is one of my favorite YouTubers who prepares her own food, grows her own food, does a lot of home cooking. And when she prepares food, one of the things I've noticed about her is that she puts salt in multiple times. So not just at the beginning or not just at the end, but sometimes as she's putting in, a whole bunch more vegetables or something like that. So her theory is that she's flavoring every layer of the meal. So it's not just like a top note or a bottom note, but it's put through the whole thing. I think Jesus would agree with this seasoning plan. Not talking about our heart health, not talking about our blood pressure, but thinking about this as a metaphor for who we are to be as the people of God. To make sure that we mix the salt in, to make sure that the salt is flavoring the world. I think sometimes we get this notion that we have to be separate, right? But Jesus here is saying, become salt, become ordinary and everyday, but become the thing that gives flavor, that gives joy, that gives hope to the world. Mix it in, be fully integrated in the world. I try not to give you too many explanations of language and words as I preach. But today I think it's important because in this passage, there's a significance to the language that we miss in English. So in English, we do not have the plural second person unless we use the colloquial y'all, right? But nobody's going to let you, what do you do when you do the verbs in another language? We're not going to be able to do those. And so y'all is not actually in the formal language, right? When we hear you, what do you hear? Me, right? And in this passage, Matthew says, you are the light of the world. So what do you hear? I am the light of the world, right? Which is not incorrect, but it's not as correct as it could be. Does that make sense? Because in Greek, as in many other languages, there is a plural second person, right? So that what really Jesus is saying here in Matthew is you all of us all are the salt of the earth. All of us all are the light of the world. All right. So, that's a little language lesson, right? But why is that important? What is the difference between hearing you are the light of the world and hearing all us all are the light of the world? Right? When we think of it as us as the me, right? As you say, the me, that I am the light of the world, I am the salt of the earth. We personalize it, right? And we miss the communal nature, the communal connection that helps us live into this notion. How many of you have been like, oh, I'm salty, but a different kind of salty today? Right? Or my light's a little dim, right? How many of you have maybe felt a little guilt or shame? Maybe not a whole lot. I mean, I'm hoping not a whole lot, but at least that little tinge that said, oh, I didn't live up to it today. I missed out. Oh, how many of you have had the experience where you felt like you have missed the boat on revealing the good news in your actions or your life? I think we all have, right? We've all fallen short. We all have those days we miss. Well, here's the thing. When we do this in community, when we do this work in community, this work of being the salt and the light of the world, when we do that, when we see that as communal work, it changes those feelings. Because some days when I'm being a little salty, but not the right kind of salty, a friend, a beloved brother or sister in Christ comes alongside and says, it's okay. We're in this together. I can help give joy to you or loan some hope that the world can be better, that God's kingdom is. So this is not a mere play of words. This comes when you think about the communal expression of both salt and light, like salt being most effective when there isn't just one little sprinkle of it in your food. Right? That trend of putting it right on top of cookies, right? But when there are more than just you, when we're connected in that great web of life, and we're being salty, we're being salt, we're being hope, we're being joy in the world, how much more effective is that if it's not just on one of our shoulders, but that we are doing it communally? Or think about if you're just salt, right? If we're supposed to just be salt, not salt in the world, how salty would this area be? Right? How many of us really love to just stick our finger in a salt dish like kids will for sugar? No, right? It needs some other things it's at its best when it's flavoring and enlivening something else. And the same is true for light. Light has a communal nature to it as well. Because what's the purpose of having, we call it, we actually have a phrase for it now, it's light pollution, when it doesn't actually do anything for us, right? But light has a communal function because for light to be effective, it emerges within a poorly illuminated environment. Another way, it lights up the corners. It helps us see those other places, those places that maybe are a little hidden if we don't turn on the light, right? And it brightens those what's already present sometimes. Sometimes our job as light, using this metaphor, is to shine on the fact that there are other people with gifts. Not to be the gift, but to stand and say, yay, look at this, so that others may see as well. See, Jesus is inviting us as the gathered community, the one he's preaching to, because this is still part of the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes, the blessed be, you blessed are, right? But but Jesus is inviting that community, and by extension us, to be salt and light, not just me or you, but us, y'all, in community, to season and illumine the world. And actually, I hate to break it to you, this isn't actually an invitation. This is one of those places where Jesus says, this is what you are. Right? This isn't what you could be. This is what you are. You are. Not what you should be, not what you might be, but what you are. You are. We are light and salt as metaphors, right? Like, obviously we're not that salty, hopefully, right? Right? And unsalty salt and light hidden under a bushel are useless. Right? And I always think about, and ridiculous, right? The salt doesn't lose its saltiness, it just gives it away, right? It is not lost. Just lends it to other things, right? And lights hidden under bushels do one of two things. They either are extinguished or they set the bushel on fire, right? It's a ridiculous image because that's not what we do. You are already these things. You are salt and light, and there's nothing you can do about it. So why don't you work with it, right? Right. Now, so what are we going to do with that salt and lightness? And Jesus has an answer for that in our passage this morning. It's that second half, and in your Bible, it would have put a little added little heading to tell you you were changing topics, but you're not really changing the topic, because what Jesus says is that the way we live out our salt and light is to fulfill the law. To be a salty and light-giving community that changes the environment around us. Not because the law itself is perfect, or that the law itself is some magical formula, but because by paying attention to those rules, we can live in community. We can do this communal work together. And then as the closer we get to God's realized vision of the world, the better we get at that. What a wonderful idea, right? So Jesus sends us out into the world as a community, as connected people, to show God's way in the world. Through our words, yes, and more often than not, our actions, right? You all have heard of St. Francis of Assisi. St. Francis of Assisi would do crazy things like, give everything he owned away to the poor and walk unarmed into the Muslim army and the Holy Land in hopes of stopping the war. He did things like, and he inspired millions of people, even in his day, to love and sacrifice for others. And there's a story, apocryphal or not, about one day a new friar wanted to go out preaching with Francis because, he was famous, right? So I got to learn something from this guy, right? Kind of feeling. And they went around all day helping people in trouble. And at the end of the day, this young friar protested that he had learned nothing about preaching, right? And Francis said, you should preach the gospel at all times and use words when absolutely necessary, which is probably what I have to do because I can't, mime this whole sermon, right? I guess I could try. And our passage from Isaiah this morning Matthew's echoing it, or to be reminding us of the clear connection between justice, liberation, and the presence of God. Let me say that again, because we're being reminded that justice and liberation and the presence of God go together. And in the Isaiah, they're talking about there's this conflict going on about how the people are doing all the right things and missing the point. Right? So there's this phrase that says, you fast all day, but you torture your slaves. Think about that. Is that what God's asking of us? No, right? And what Isaiah is saying is that it is in essence how Sally McPeak would put it, if God is absent from this world, it's because we are, right? If we're missing the point of what it means to fulfill the law, of what it means to be salt and light, yeah, of course God is absent from this world, because we're the hands and feet, we're the people in connection and drawing those connections when others can't see them. Whenever people take up their vocation, right? And vocation is not just your job. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it isn't, right? But your vocation to see where justice is and to tend to the suffering of this world. That's where God is made known and present. And that is where we become salt and light. And we live into the verse 12 of that Isaiah passage, where it says, where we will be repairers of the breach and restorers of the street. Which is an image for me. I see this sense of healing and restoration just in that one little phrase. So what are the ways in which we can make God present in this world? How can we act for good and take up the responsibility to make our respective corners of the world a little bit better? I don't have any simple answers, but I'm sure there are some, right? But what I want to challenge you this week is to embrace your saltiness, to embrace your lightness, to pay attention to the places where your saltiness is in community with other saltiness and brings healing and wholeness to the world. I want you to be aware of how saltiness and light as metaphors are God working through you. And to consider how others' saltiness and lightness, how that community of that is helping God work. Amen.